The first land plants were ankle-high pioneers clinging to moisture. Then evolution invented wood, roots, and leaves, and in doing so constructed Earth's first forests and permanently altered the planet's atmosphere, geology, and climate. What if I told you that trees didn't exist for the first 50 million years of plant life on land? Picture it, 400 million years ago, continents covered in green, but nothing taller than your shin. A world of plants without forests, without shade, without the sound of wind through leaves. Just low, dense mats of vegetation stretching to the horizon. Then something changed. Plants discovered how to defy gravity, how to build structures that could stand 10, 20, 30 meters tall. They invented wood, and in doing so, they didn't just change themselves. They changed everything. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how plants engineered one of the most sophisticated materials in nature, and why that innovation triggered a cascade of changes that rewrote Earth's climate, created soil deep enough to feed future life, and set the stage for animals to finally leave the water. This is the story of the first towers built on Earth. Not by animals, not by intelligence, by organisms competing for sunlight. How does evolution build a skyscraper when every generation starts from a seed? Early Devonian period, 410 million years ago. The land is green now, but it's a flat green. Ground-hugging plants, primitive vascular species like Cooksonia and Baragwanathia, cover rocks near water sources. They've solved the basic problems of terrestrial life. They have vascular tissue to move water. They have spores that travel on wind. They have roots that anchor and absorb, but they're limited by their own success. Why? Because sunlight is finite and every plant wants it. When you're 10 centimeters tall and your neighbor is 10 centimeters tall, you both get light. But when your neighbor mutates to 15 centimeters, suddenly you're in shadow. Did you know that being shaded can reduce a plant's photosynthesis by 80% or more? Shadow is death. So the neighbor that grows 15 centimeters survives, reproduces, passes on the height advantage. Next generation, someone hits 20 centimeters. Evolution doesn't stop at good enough. It stops at better than everyone else. An arms race began. Not for territory, not for mates, for sky. But height creates engineering problems that don't exist when you're small. A 10-centimeter plant can support itself with thin stems. Water only has to travel a short distance. Wind doesn't threaten to knock it over. Scale that up to 1 meter and everything breaks. Thin stems buckle. Water pressure drops. Wind becomes catastrophic. How do you build a living structure that can stand against gravity and weather for decades? Plants face the same challenges human engineers face with skyscrapers. Structural support, resource distribution, stability. The difference is plants had to solve it through mutation and selection, not blueprints. The first attempts were crude. Some plants like Rhynia grew thicker stems, but they were still soft tissue. They could reach maybe 30 centimeters before collapsing under their own weight. Others tried branching, dividing into multiple stems to spread the load. Better, but still limited. The problem was material science. Plant cells are bags of water wrapped in cellulose. Cellulose is strong in tension but weak in compression. It's like building a skyscraper out of fabric. You can't just make stems thicker. You need a fundamentally different structural material. What if plants couldn't evolve that material? What if the chemistry of life simply didn't allow for rigid, durable structures? Then the arms race stops at waist height. Earth remains a world of scrubland. Forests never exist. And everything that depends on forests, from complex food webs to the massive carbon cycling that stabilizes climate, never happens. Around 400 million years ago, a chemical innovation appeared that would define terrestrial life for the next 400 million years. Lignin, a complex organic polymer that plants could deposit between cellulose fibers in their cell walls, binding them into a rigid matrix. Did you know that lignin is one of the most abundant organic compounds on Earth, second only to cellulose, and it exists almost entirely because of this evolutionary arms race? Lignin changed everything. Stems reinforced with lignin could grow thick without collapsing. They could support weight. They could resist wind and weather. They became wood. The first woody plants, like Watieza, appeared around 385 million years ago in what is now New York. They looked bizarre. A straight trunk rising 8 meters high, crowned with a burst of frond-like branches. No leaves, no side branches. Just vertical towers topped with photosynthetic arrays, but they were tall. Taller than anything that had come before, and tall meant winning. How does a 1-meter plant compete with an 8-meter tree? It doesn't, it dies in the shadow. Within a few million years, woody plants dominated. The selection pressure was absolute: grow tall or disappear. But wood solved one problem and created another. A tree 8 meters tall has roots 20 centimeters deep. The physics don't balance. Wind pushes on the trunk like a lever. The roots tear free. The tree falls. Height requires depth. Plants needed root systems as sophisticated as their trunks. The solution was elegant. Grow roots in the same way you grow trunks. Lignified roots push deep into soil, 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters down. They branched extensively, creating massive underground networks. Did you know that a single mature tree can have roots extending 50 meters laterally and 10 meters deep? These roots did more than anchor. They shattered bedrock. As roots grew, they forced their way into cracks in stone. They secreted acids that dissolved minerals. They expanded and contracted with water uptake, physically breaking apart solid rock. Over millions of years, plants ground bedrock into fine particles. They created deep soil, not the thin paste of rock dust that mosses made. Real soil, meters thick, rich in minerals, capable of holding water and supporting vast ecosystems. Why does deep soil matter? Because it's infrastructure for everything that comes next. Deep soil retains water during droughts. It stores nutrients. It provides habitat for fungi, bacteria, and eventually animals. Without deep soil, terrestrial ecosystems remain primitive, fragile, limited to wet areas. With deep soil, land becomes as productive as the ocean. Plants were terraforming Earth at the geological level. But here's where the story gets dangerous. As forests spread, they didn't just change the ground, they changed the air. Trees perform photosynthesis at a scale mosses could never achieve. More biomass means more CO2 absorbed, more oxygen released. Throughout the Devonian period, oxygen levels rose. By the end of the Devonian, atmospheric oxygen reached 15%, higher than it had been in hundreds of millions of years. What if oxygen kept rising? What if plants were so successful that they fundamentally destabilized the atmosphere? Because oxygen isn't just the breath of life, it's fuel for fire. At 15% oxygen, fires are possible but rare. At 20%, they become common. At 25%, even wet vegetation burns. Did you know that during the later Carboniferous period, when oxygen hit 35%, wildfires were likely catastrophic and nearly constant? But we're not there yet. In the Devonian, forests were still establishing themselves. The balance between CO2 drawdown and oxygen release hadn't yet tipped into crisis. Still, the trend was clear. Plants were changing the atmosphere faster than geological processes could respond. And there was another consequence no one could have predicted. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. When plants remove it from the atmosphere, global temperatures drop. As forests spread across the continents throughout the Devonian, they pulled billions of tons of carbon out of the air and locked it into wood. Global temperatures began to fall. How much can you cool a planet before it becomes a problem? The cooling wasn't immediate. It took millions of years. But the trend was undeniable. By the end of the Devonian period, around 360 million years ago, Earth was significantly cooler than it had been before forests existed. Ice caps grew at the poles. Ocean levels dropped. Coastal ecosystems, where much of marine life still thrived, were disrupted. Did you know that the late Devonian extinction event, which killed 75% of all species, was likely triggered in part by the success of forests? Plants didn't mean to cause a mass extinction. They were just growing, competing, surviving. But their collective impact was planetary. This is what happens when life changes faster than geological equilibrium can adjust. Yet even as forests contributed to marine extinctions, they were creating new possibilities on land. The deep soils they generated supported more plant diversity. Different species evolved to fill different niches: tall canopy trees, understory shrubs, ground cover. The first true forests emerged, not plantations of identical species, but complex ecosystems with vertical structure, sunlight filtering through canopy leaves, shadows on the forest floor, decomposing wood feeding fungi and bacteria, roots intertwined in massive underground networks. These forests created microclimates, cooler, more humid conditions beneath the canopy. Rain that fell on forests was absorbed by soil rather than running off immediately. Why does this matter for animals? Because stable, moist environments are where life thrives. Arthropods, primitive insects, and their relatives had already ventured onto land to feed on early plants. But with forests came abundance. More plant matter meant more food. More niches meant more specialization. Insects diversified rapidly. Some fed on leaves, Some bored into wood, some fed on spores, some became predators hunting other insects. The first flying insects appeared in the Devonian, taking advantage of the three-dimensional space forests provided. And with abundant insects came the next logical step in the food chain: predators. Early tetrapods, the first vertebrates to walk on land, had been confined to water's edge, feeding on aquatic prey. But forest full of insects? That was a buffet worth leaving the water for. Did you know that forests created the energy base that made land vertebrate life possible? Without plant biomass feeding insects, there's no food for small predators. Without small predators, there's no food for large predators. The entire terrestrial food web exists because plants figured out how to grow tall. By 360 million years ago, the world was transformed. Continents that had been barren rock 100 million years earlier were now covered in forests stretching hundreds of kilometers. Soil meters deep covered bedrock. Oxygen-rich air filled with the sounds of insects. Rivers flowed differently, slowed by vegetation, depositing sediment to create rich floodplains. The planet was greener, cooler, and more complex than it had ever been. But forests were just getting started. Trees had conquered the land. They had built the infrastructure for terrestrial ecosystems. They had changed the atmosphere and climate. But the arms race wasn't over. Because here's the thing about competition. It never stops. 30-meter trees are impressive until someone evolves to 40 meters. Thick trunks are strong until wood-boring insects learn to eat them. Deep roots are stable until fungi evolve to rot them. Evolution had created forests. Now it would perfect them. The next chapter involves plants solving problems they didn't even know they had. Problems of reproduction, of survival in extreme environments, of defending against herbivores that were rapidly evolving to eat them. What happens when plants stop fighting gravity and start fighting everything else? Next episode, the Spore Lords. How ferns and their relatives perfected the forest, dominated the Carboniferous, and built the coal deposits that would one day power human civilization. This is HistoPrimordia, where history comes alive. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and join us for the next episode story.